Every Christmas morning, my wife would disappear for 3 hours. She said she had errands, gifts to pick up, or friends to visit. I never questioned it. For 10 years, I believed her and waited by the window with hot coffee and trust. But one winter, something inside me changed. Her smile looked forced, her excuses weaker, her eyes colder. I decided to follow her. And what I saw that day froze my heart forever. Before I tell you what happened, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. Every Christmas morning started the same way. She would wake up early, hum softly in the kitchen, make breakfast, and smile like everything in the world was perfect. The smell of cinnamon and coffee filled the house. She would hand me a cup, kiss my cheek, and say she had some errands to run before lunch. I never questioned it. I thought it was part of her tradition. Maybe a surprise, maybe something special she did for us. She always left wearing the same gray coat, the one with the loose button near the collar. Her scarf was red, her gloves black, and she always carried the same small bag. She never rushed, never looked nervous. She just smiled, said she'd be back soon, and walked out the door as snowflakes began to fall. 3 hours later, she'd return. Her hands were cold, her cheeks pale, and her eyes red as if from the cold wind. She would brush it off, saying the lines at the stores were long, or the weather delayed her. I believed her. For 10 straight years, I believed every word she said. Each time she returned, she looked different, quieter, heavier. Somehow, she would sit by the fireplace and stare into the flames, lost in thoughts she never shared. I'd try to ask how her morning went, but she always changed the subject. She'd ask about dinner or start wrapping gifts, pretending nothing was wrong. The first few years, I thought nothing of it. People have habits. Maybe she needed a break from the noise of this season. But with time, something about it felt colder. It wasn't just her absence. It was the way she returned, distant, detached, as if her heart stayed wherever she had been. One year, I tried to go with her. I said we could run our errands together. She smiled and said no, that it was something she needed to do alone. Her tone was calm, but her eyes warned me not to ask again, so I didn't. I told myself marriage meant trust. I told myself love meant space. But deep down, something didn't sit right. Every Christmas felt this'm. She would leave at the same time, return at the same time, and carry the same silence home with her. She never missed it, not once. It didn't matter if the roads were icy or the snowstorm was bad. She always went. Sometimes she forgot her gloves. Sometimes her scarf was wet when she came back. Once I noticed dirt on the hem of her coat. When I asked, she said she slipped near a parking lot. I believed her then too. Love makes you blind. It makes you see patterns as coincidences, lies askance, and absence as mystery instead of warning. Every year, I told myself not to ruin Christmas with doubt. Every year, I waited by the window, watching snow pile on the driveway, hoping to see her headlights appear. And when she finally walked through the door, I always greeted her with warmth, pretending not to notice her trembling hands, or the way her smile never reached her eyes. She would hug me, say she loved me, and I would believe her again, because believing was easier than wondering where she went. For 10 years, that was our silent tradition. Shy disappeared, and I pretended not to see. Until one winter morning, something inside me snapped. Her excuses no longer made sense. The patterns no longer felt harmless. My trust had turned into suspicion, and I knew the next Christmas wouldn't end the same way. Last December, the snow came early. Thick, heavy flakes covered the street before sunrise. The world outside was silent, white, and cold. I woke up before her that morning. She was still asleep, her hand resting on my arm, her breathing slow and steady. For a moment, I almost forgot the questions that had been haunting me all year. Almost. When she finally woke up, everything happened exactly the same. The smile, the breakfast, the same gray coat, their scarf, the same words. I have some errands to run. She kissed my cheek, picked up her bag, and walked toward the door. But this time, I didn't stay seated. Something inside me refused to gnaw it anymore. I watched her step into the snow, the flakes sticking to her hair. My heart pounded, not from anger, but from something colder. Fear. Not the kind of fear that comes from danger, but the kind that grows from knowing something you love is about to break. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my truck keys. My hand shook as I locked the door behind me. The world outside was still quiet, the snow muffling every sound. Her taillights glowed faintly in the distance, 2 red dots cutting through the white fog. I started the engine and followed at a distance. My tires slid slightly on the icy road, but I didn't stop. I didn't care. The only thing that mattered now was the truth. The same truth I had ignored for 10 years was finally within reach. The roads were empty. Christmas songs played faintly on the radio, but I turned them off. I didn't want to hear joy. I wanted silence. The sound of my own breathing filled the car. Every turn she took, I followed, keeping far enough not to be seen. She didn't drive toward the Mallor, the shops. She didn't stop at the florist or the bakery. She kept going past the town square, past the last row of houses, into the outskirts where the trees grew thick and the signs of life disappeared. My heart sank. I realized I'd never followed her this far before. I didn't even know where this road led. The snow grew heavier, the world quieter. My headlights bounced off white branches and empty fields. Every second felt longer than the last. She slowed down at a turn. I turned off my lights and kept my distance. Her car moved carefully, tires crunching on frozen ground. Then she turned down a narrow lane I had never noticed before. No streetlights, no houses, just a path lined with frost-covered trees. I stopped the truck at the entrance and killed the engine. My breath fogged the windshield. The silence outside was absolute. Only the faint hum of her car engine echoed through the cold. For a few minutes, he sat still, trying to decide if I really wanted to see where she was going. Part of me hoped it was nothing, that I would feel foolish, that she was just buying a gift or visiting someone kind. But another part of me knew better. You don't hide the truth for 10 years unless it's something that can destroy everything. I opened the door, stepped out, and felt the snow crunch beneath my boots. The air stung my face, but I kept walking, following the faint red glow of her tail lights disappearing deeper into the trees. It was supposed to be Christmas, a day of family, warmth, and peace. But as I walked through that frozen silence, I felt something colder than the snow sink into my chest. And I knew, even before I saw where she stopped, that whatever waited ahead wasn't going to bring me comfort. It was going to bring an ending. The lane she turned onto was narrow and almost hidden by trees. The branches above were heavy with snow, bending low, forming a tunnel that swallowed the light. My tires scrunched quietly over the ice as I followed her from a distance. There were no houses here, no stores, no sign of anyone living nearby, just white fields, frozen fences, and silence. The further I drove, the darker it got. The sky was gray and heavy, and even my headlight seemed weaker under the falling snow. Every turn of the wheel sounded louder than it should. I could feel my heartbeat in my chest, steady, bootoonacy, like a drum before bad news. Her car kept a slow pace. Sometimes she'd stop for a moment, then continue. I thought she might have noticed me, but she never looked back. She knew this road. Her movements were confident, familiar, almost like routine. That realization hit me harder than the cold air seeping through the cracks in my window. I kept my distance. The snow started falling faster, covering her tracks almost as soon as her tires made them. It was as if the road itself didn't want to remember where she had gone. I rolled down my window slightly and listened. Only the sound of the wind, the creak of branches, and the slow hum of her engine. After 10 minutes, the trees opened up to a wide clearing. The land stretched flat and pale under a blanket of white. Her car slowed again. I turned off my engine, letting the silence take over. The only movement was the exhaust rising faintly from her car ahead. She turned down another narrow path that curved away from the main road. There was no reason for anyone to be here. No houses, no stores, not even a gas station. Just an endless stretch of snow and silence. My chest grew tighter with each second. I followed on foot now, leaving the truck behind. The cold bit through my jacket as I stepped into the wind. My boots sank deep into the snow, every step loud in the stillness. I could see her car parked ahead, half hidden behind a line of bare trees. The taillights were still glowing faintly. She sat inside for a few minutes, unmoving. Then slowly the door opened. She stepped out, wrapped in her gray coat, her scarf pulled tight around her neck. The red outfit stood out sharply against the white. She held something in her hand, a small bouquet wrapped in paper. My breath caught. I crouched behind a tree, my body shaking, not from the cold, but from something deeper. She looked around once, then started walking down a narrow trail that disappeared behind a hill. It stayed far enough behind to keep hidden, moving slowly, matching her pace. The wind howled softly through the trees. Snowflakes hit my face, melting into tiny drops that ran down my skin. Every sound felt sharper, every step heavier. The further she walked, the clearer it became. This wasn't a shopping errand. This wasn't a visit to a friend. She was going somewhere she didn't want me to see. When she disappeared over the hill, I stopped for a moment, my lungs burning from the cold air. I waited, listening. The wind dropped for a second, and I heard it, faint, distant. The sound of her sobbing carried through the snow. I followed again, slower now, each step quieter than the last. The path curved downward, and in the distance, through the curtain of snow, I saw where she had gone. It wasn't a store. It wasn't a friend's house. It was something else entirely. Something that made the air around me stop moving. And as I stood there, half hidden among the trees, I realized that whatever truth waited for me ahead wasn't going to fix anything. It was going to break everything instead. She stopped walking when the trees thinned out. Ahead of her, the white ground opened into a small, quiet clearing. I could see the black iron fence even before I saw what it surrounded. A cemetery, old, isolated, half buried under snow. The kind of place people forget exists. My breath caught in my throat. Her footsteps were careful, almost rehearsed like she had walked this same path many times before. She pushed the gate gently. It creaked loud enough to echo through the still air. She didn't flinch. She just stepped inside. I stayed behind the fence, hidden by a tree, my fingers numb against the bark. She walked past several graves until she stopped in front of one. I couldn't read the name yet, but the way she sank to her knees told me everything I needed to know. Whoever rested there mattered more to her than I ever had. The snow was falling harder now, covering her hair and shoulders. She brushed it away, took out the bouquet she'd been carrying. They weren't store-bought flowers. They were old roses, the same kind we had used on our wedding day. I remembered them instantly. She had kept them pressed in a frame for years. I thought it was for us. I thought it meant something about our love. She placed the flowers on the grave and stayed there, unmoving. Her head bowed. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but her lips moved slowly, carefully, like she was speaking to someone who could still answer. My body felt heavy. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. Minutes passed, maybe more. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The wind carried her voice faintly. Not words, just sounds like small pieces of sorrow breaking apart. Then she wiped her eyes with her sleeve and pulled something else from her bag. A small picture frame. I saw her hold it against the headstone and trace her fingers over it. The cold air bit into my skin, but I didn't feel it. I was too busy trying to make sense of the scene in front of me. Why here? Why him? Why every year? She reached out and touched the snow-covered stone again. Her shoulders trembled. Her hands shook. Then she leaned forward until her forehead touched the name carved into the marble. It was a gesture of intimacy, the kind you share only with someone you still love. I felt my chest tighten. My stomach dropped. A ringing filled my ears. I wanted to turn away, but I couldn't. I had spent 10 years wondering where she went. Now Ik knew, and it felt worse than every Liesh ever told. The wind howled through the trees, carrying small pieces of Hervis with it. I couldn't hear the words, but I could feel them. Grief, guilt, devotion. It was all there in her movements. She placed the frame at the base of the grave, adjusted the flowers, and sat back on her heels. Her hands stayed pressed together as if in prayer. Then she just stared at the snow, at the name, at the space where love had once lived. For a long moment, she didn't move at all. She just sat there, frozen in time. I wanted to call out to her, but something in me stopped. I didn't belong in that moment. That place wasn't mine. Whatever she came here for, it was between her and the man beneath that stone. Then she stood up, dusted off her knees, and wiped her face again. She turned to leave, walking slowly back toward her car. I stepped behind a tree, my heart pounding. She didn't see me. She didn't know I was there. When she drove off, I stayed. I walked into the cemetery through the same gate, my legs heavy as stone. The wind had already covered her footprints. The world looked untouched again, but the truth was right there, waiting beneath the snow. I stepped closer, the snow crunching under my boots. My hands trembled as I reached for the headstone she had just knelt beside. The bouquet she left behind was already dusted white, the petals stiff from the cold. I crouched down and brushed the snow away slowly, revealing the name carved deep into the stone. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The letters were familiar, too familiar. It wasn't a family name. It wasn't anyone from her side or mine. It was a man's name, one I had only heard once, years ago, spoken quietly and never mentioned again. The date below the name stopped my heart completely. The day before our wedding, the same night she had disappeared all those years ago, claiming there was an emergency at her mother's. I had believed her then, just like I believed everything else she told me. The truth hit me so hard I almost lost my balance. She hadn't been visiting a friend. She hadn't been shopping. Every Christmas she came here to him. I stared at the grave for a long time trying to process it. The more I looked, the more the pieces began to connect. The preserved wedding flowers, the missing hours, the quiet sadness in her eyes every December, the way she always avoided talking about Christmas plans. It all made sense now. This wasn't guilt over something she did. It was love she couldn't bury. She had built an entire marriage beside me while her heart stayed frozen in a graveyard. I touched the cold stone again. The wind blew harder, but I didn't move. My fingertips ached from the chill, but I needed to feel the reality of it. The name carved there was more than just a memory. It was a truth that had lived beside me for 10 years without a sound. I looked around, the snow-covered field, the line of quiet graves, the trees bending under the cold, everything wascient except the storm inside me. I realized that for every gift we'd exchanged, every dinner we'd shared, every anniversary we'd celebrated, she had carried this secret with her, and I'd been too blind, too trusting to ever notice. I took one last look at the flowers she'd left. They were the same color as the ones she placed on our wedding table, white roses tied with silver ribbon. She had said white meant purity. Now I saw it differently. It meant remembrance. It meant a promise that was never meant for me. My knees felt weak. I stood slowly brushing the snow off my hands. My chest felt tight, not from anger, but from something deeper, the weight of understanding. She wasn't cheating in the usual way. She wasn't meeting someone new. She was still in love with someone who had never come back. She had spent every Christmas mourning him while pretending to celebrate with me. The truth was colder than the snow beneath my feet. I stepped back, staring at the grave one last time. The wind carried her scent faintly, the same perfume she wore every December. I finally understood why. It wasn't for me. It was for the man buried beneath my feet. I turned away, my breath coming out in heavy clouds. Behind me, the flowers lay still, untouched, silent. I had followed her for the truth, and I found it. But standing there, surrounded by graves, I realized something worse than betrayal. I was married to a ghost, and I had never known it. I should have left right then, but something held me there. The wind had calmed, and the air felt heavy, as if the world itself was waiting. I heard the sound of a car door closing in the distance. She hadn't left yet. I crouched behind the fence again, my breath fogging the air. She walked back toward the grave, slower this time. Her head was lowered, her gloved hand covering her mouth. She didn't know I was still there. I stayed still, hidden behind a stone angel near the path. When she reached the headstone, she knelt again, placing her hand flat against the name. Her voice came out in a whisper, soft but clear enough to hear between the wind. She said she missed him. She said she was sorry. She said she'd always love him. The words cut through me sharper than ice. They weren't words of guilt. They were words of devotion, words meant for someone she had never stopped belonging to. She traced the letters of his name with her fingers, her gloves leaving faint marks on the frost. She spoke about our home, about me, about the life we built. She said she tried to move on but couldn't. She said she pretended to be happy, but her heart stayed here. Every sentence felt like a knife turning slowly. She reached into her bag and took out a small glass box. Inside were dried petals, the same white roses from our wedding. She opened the box carefully, placed the petals on the grave, and let the wind carry them away one by one. Her shoulders shook as she whispered again. Her words broke apart into small sobs. She told him she'd kept her promise, that she still wore his ring, not on her hand, but around her neck, hidden beneath her clothes. I gripped the fence so tight my knuckles went numb. I wanted to shout, to demand why, to ask how long she had carried this ghost between us. But I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. The sound of her crying froze me more than any winter ever could. She stayed there for several minutes, her head bowed, her body trembling in the cold. Then she whispered something that I'll never forget, that she wished he could forgive her for marrying me. My heart sank. Everything I believed about our life together began to crumble. I thought we'd built love on trust, but now I knew we had built it on her grief. I wasn't their partner. I was her distraction from loss. When she finally stood up, she touched the grave one last time and said goodbye. Not the kind of goodbye you say to the dead. The kind you say to someone you still expect to meet again, someday somewhere. I stepped back behind the tree, watching her walk away, her figure small against the white snow. The wind carried her sobs for a few more seconds, then swallowed them whole. She reached her car, paused, and looked back once. I ducked behind the trunk before she could see me. The engine started, and she drove off slowly, disappearing into the mist like a shadow retreating from daylight. When the sound of her car faded, I stepped out again. The silence hit me hard. I walked to the grave, stood where she had knelt, and looked down at the flowers. Her footprints were still fresh in the snow. I stared at the ring she'd mentioned, imagining it hidden just beneath her scarf all those years. I realized then that love doesn't always leave in anger. Sometimes it just never fully arrives. I stood there until the cold burned through my jacket. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just listened to the empty wind, to the graveyard silence, to the faint echo of a promise that was never meant for me. I didn't confront her there. I couldn't. The words wouldn't have come out even if I tried. My body felt heavy, my throat dry, my thoughts spinning in silence. I turned away from the grave, leaving her flowers behind me. The snow had started to fall again, soft but relentless, covering every mark, every footprint, every trace of what had just happened. I walked slowly back through the trees, following the path she had taken minutes earlier. The cold air burned my lungs, but I barely felt it. Each step sounded louder than the last, echoing in the empty woods like a question I couldn't answer. When I reached my truck, my hands were shaking too much to hold the keys. I sat there for a while, staring at the steering wheel, trying to process what I had seen. The woman I had shared my life with was living two lives, one with me, one buried under the snow. I started the engine, but I didn't drive right away. I looked out the window at the narrow lane leading back to town, the same lane she drove every year. I wondered how many times I had waved her goodbye without knowing the truth. 10 years. 10 times. 10. Christmas morning spent waiting by the window for a woman who was never really gone. Just somewhere her heart refused to leave. As I drove home, the radio played soft Christmas music. I turned it off. The songs felt wrong now, too bright, too clean, too unaware of how real love can rot quietly when built in secrets. The road blurred as I drove through the snow. The town lights appeared in the distance, warm and familiar. For a second, I wanted to believe nothing had changed, that I could walk into the house, smell the food cooking, and pretend everything was fine. But that illusion was gone. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was already there. She had beaten me home. The front porch light was on, just like always. Through the window, I saw her moving in the kitchen, calm, practiced, pretending like the morning never happened. I stayed in the car for a long time, watching her through the glass. She looked peaceful. She smiled as she set the table, her movement so normal it made my stomach twist. I realized then that lies don't always look like lies. Sometimes they look like love dressed in habit. I finally went inside. The warmth hit me instantly. The smell of cinnamon and roast filled the air. The house looked beautiful, decorated, glowing, festive, the kind of home people dream of having. She turned around and smiled like nothing was wrong. Her hair was perfect again, her eyes bright, her voice gentle. She asked how my morning had been. I said nothing. I hung my coat, sat in the chair, and stared at the flickering lights on the tree. She moved around the kitchen, humming softly, acting as if the last 3 hours hadn't happened. I watched her reflection in the window. She checked her hair once, fixed her scarf, and practiced a small smile, the same smile she wore when she came home every Christmas. I didn't mention the cemetery. I didn't ask about the man. Didn't need to. The silence between us said enough. The truth was sitting in the same room now, wrapped neatly in holiday decorations. Dinner was quiet. She talked about gifts, about the neighbors, about nothing that mattered. I nodded, pretending to listen. The house smelled of cinnamon, but it also smelled like lies. Sweet on the surface, bitter underneath. When she reached across the table to pour me a drink, her hands were steady again, not trembling, not cold. She had practiced this life for years. She knew exactly how to hide it. I took the glass and looked at her for a long time. She smiled back, unaware that I had already seen the part of her she kept buried in the snow. Didn't say a word. I didn't have to, because sometimes silence isn't forgiveness. It's the beginning of goodbye. That night, the house was quiet. The fire crackled softly, and the lights from the Christmas tree flickered across the room. She sat beside me on the couch, wrapping gifts, humming like she always did. Her face was calm, her movements gentle, her lies perfectly folded between ribbons and paper. I stared at her hands, steady, precise, the same hands that had touched another man's grave just hours ago. She asked me if I liked the decorations. I nodded. My voice stayed trapped behind my teeth. Every time she smiled, it felt like watching a stranger perform a life she'd rehearsed for years. Dinner passed without a word about the morning. She laughed once or twice, maybe out of habit. I pretended to eat. My mind wasn't in that room anymore. It was still in the cemetery, standing over that headstone, reading the name that had lived between us in silence. After dinner, she cleaned up quickly, humming a tune that didn't reach her eyes. I sat by the window watching snowfall outside. Each flake landed softly on the glass, melting away like the last traces of denial I had left. She came over with 2 cups of tea. She handed me one and sat across from me. The way she looked at me, calm, steady, made my stomach turn. How could she act so normal after what she had done every Christmas for 10 years? How could she hold this secret so tightly and never let it slip? I stared at the empty vase on the dining table, the one she always filled with flowers after her errands. This year, it sat empty. I realized why. The flowers were still at the cemetery, resting on another man's grave. I put the cup down and looked at her. My mouth opened, but for a few seconds, nothing came out. My voice felt strange, unused. Finally, I asked her where she really went. Every year, her body froze. Her hand stopped halfway between the cup and her mouth. The air in the room changed instantly. Heavy, sharp, electric. For the first time, she didn't have an answer ready. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine, waiting for a sign of how much I knew. I said nothing else. I didn't accuse her. I didn't raise my voice. I just waited. And the silence broke her faster than anger ever could. Her lips parted slightly. Her breath trembled. The smile she always wore slipped away like it had never belonged to her. The mask was gone. What was left was raw and frightened. She tried to speak but couldn't. Her eyes filled with tears before the first word even came. She looked down, gripping the edge of the table like it could hold her together. I watched her crumble without saying another word. The truth doesn't always explode. Sometimes it just leaks out slowly, painfully through the cracks people spend years trying to hide. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper, the sound of defeat. I didn't need to hear the words. I already knew them. The silence that followed said everything she couldn't. She broke down completely. Her body shook. Tears fell, one after another, hitting the floor like small, quiet confessions. She tried to explain about the accident, the promise, the guilt, but I stopped listening halfway through. I had heard enough without hearing anything at all. I stood up and walked toward the window. The snow outside was thick, the world covered in white. Behind me, she kept crying softly. Her voice faded into the background like a song I didn't recognize anymore. I didn't shout. I didn't comfort her. I just stood there, staring out at the frozen night, realizing how much colder honesty can feel than lies. When she finally fell silent, I turned off the lights. The only glow left in the room came from the tree. Red, green, gold colors of joy that now felt empty. We sat in that half-darkness. 2 people who once shared everything, but now had nothing left to give each other except silence. And in that silence, I understood. The truth had arrived, but the marriage had ended. The years that followed were quiet, colder than any winter. After that Christmas night, we never celebrated the same way again. She still decorated the tree, still cooked dinner, still wrapped gifts, but the warmth was gone. Every smile felt rehearsed, every word too careful, every silence too long. Our marriage didn't end loudly. It just faded like candlelight in an empty room. She never tried to deny it again. The next morning, her eyes were swollen from crying, but she didn't bring up what happened. Neither did I. We both pretended that conversation never took place. Some truths are too heavy to carry every day, so people bury them under routine. We moved through the years like strangers sharing the same roof. I went to work. She tended to the house, and we avoided December as if it were a wound we didn't want to reopen. But no matter how much time passed, Christmas always came back, and with it, the weight of that secret. The first Christmas, after I followed her, she didn't leave the house. She stayed beside me all morning, smiling a little too much, talking a little too loud, trying too hard to prove that she belonged here. But I saw the way she glanced at the clock around the same time she used to leave. Her fingers twitched. Her eyes drifted toward the window. Her body was with me, but her heart still wandered. The year after that, she said she needed air. I didn't stop her. She left quietly without the gray coat this time, but I knew where she went. I didn't follow. I didn't have to. I just sat by the window like I used to, except now I wasn't waiting for her to come back. I was waiting for the truth to stop hurting. When she returned, I didn't ask what she did. She didn't try to explain. We both knew the answers, and knowing was enough. We ate a dinner in silence, the same silence that had replaced love. Time passed. Her hair turned gray. Her steps slowed, but she never missed that date. Every Christmas morning, for 3 hours, she disappeared, no longer lying about errands, just walking out without a word. I never tried to stop her. People can't let goof ghosts when they think those ghosts are the only things keeping them alive. Then one year, she didn't come back on time. The snow kept falling, heavier than usual. Hours passed, and the clock ticked past the moment she usually returned. I called her phone. No answer. I waited longer, my stomach heavy with dread. When I finally went looking, I found her car parked in the same spot near the cemetery. The engine was off, the door was locked. She was still inside. Her head was resting against the window, eyes closed, a faint smile on her face. The snow had covered the windshield completely. The doctor said it was her heart. Peaceful, quick, the kind of death that comes to people who've carried too much sadness for too long. I didn't cry at first. I just sat beside her grave, the one I had to place next to his because that's what she had asked for in her final note. Now, every Christmas, I visit them both. I bring flowers, the same white roses she once carried, and place them on their graves side by side. I stand there quietly, watching the snow fall, feeling the same cold she must have felt all those years ago. I don't hate her anymore. The anger melted away long ago, just like the snow melts on the flowers I bring. What's left is something quieter. Acceptance, maybe. Or the kind of forgiveness that doesn't need words. She spent her life haunted by love. I spent mine haunted by truth. And in the end, both of us found peace in the same place under the same winter sky. Every December feels the same now. The air grows quiet, the streets turn white, and the world slows down just enough for memories to return. I still live in the same house. The same walls that once echoed with laughter now hold only silence and snowlight. I keep the decorations in their box. The tree stays unlit. The stockings never go up. Christmas for me became a season of remembering instead of celebrating. Sometimes I catch myself glancing at the clock around the hour she used to leave. Old habits don't fade easily. For a second, I expect to hear the door open, her voice calling out, her coat hanging by the wall, but it never comes. Only the wind outside, the same wind that carried her scent every winter, the same wind that whispered her name through the cracks in the window frame. I visit the cemetery early each Christmas morning. His stand in the same spot where I once watched her kneel. 2 graves now rest side by side, his and hers. I brush the snow away from their names, clean the stone, and place fresh white roses between them, the same kind she used to carry. I don't say anything. There's nothing left to say. The snow does all the talking now. I look at their names scarved deep in cold stone and think about how love doesn't always end where life does. Sometimes it stretches beyond time. Silent but stubborn, refusing Toady even when it should. She didn't betray me in the way people imagine. She just never let go of someone she lost. And maybe that's worse because it means she lived 2 lives and I only ever existed in one of them. When people talk about marriage, they speak about trust, about patience, about faith. But they never talk about ghosts. The ones people carry quietly in their hearts. I learned that ghosts don't rattle chains or appear in mirrors. They hide behind smiles, inside habits, beneath promises. They sit at the dinner table and sleep between 2 people who think they know each other. I don't blame her anymore. Love isn't something we control. It chooses. It lingers. It forgets to leave. She loved him before she loved me, and she never stopped. That's no devil. It's just tragic. When I leave the cemetery, I always look back once. The snow starts covering my footprints as soon as I take a few steps. It's like the world is trying to erase every trace of the living from the land of the gone. I let it. Some things deserve to fade. I go home, light 1 candle, and sit by the window. I don't turn on the radio. I don't make dinner. I just sit there, watching the flame flicker against the glass. That candle is for all 3 of us. For the man she couldn't forget. For the woman I lost to memory. And for the fool who thought love alone could fill the distance between them. Every year the flame burns a little slower, but I let it burn until it dies in its own. Then I close my eyes and let the darkness take over. She mourned him with flowers I thought were meant for him. I built a life around a memory that wasn't mine. And now when December comes, I light that candle not for pain, not for anger, but for truth. Because some love stories don't end with betrayal. They end with revelation. And revelation in its own quiet way is the final mercy life gives us. The chance to see what was always there,